Hello, I'm Tony Suttle, and I'm a volunteer at the Molly, the Museum of Literature Ireland, the newly opened museum in Dublin, celebrating Irish writing since about the year 1500, with perhaps a certain focus on James Joyce and other celebrated Irish writers. And we're here at the moment in Stephen's Green, one of Dublin's public parks, just across the road from the new Molly building. Molly came into existence with a collaboration between a number of people, but two of the leading bodies were perhaps the National Library of Ireland, who for many years has had a great collection of literary and other archives, and University College Dublin, which was of course the college where James Joyce in the early 1900s received his degree. And UCD had premises here on Stephen's Green, which were perhaps being a little underutilized, and the National Library in turn had this great archive but no great premises in which to display them. So that by coming together at Molly, we've been able to combine the various resources and show the story of Irish writing over many centuries. Well, an interesting writer, and many readers of Joyce, or many people coming to Joyce, maybe start halfway up the hill by trying to read Joyce's Ulysses, or even more challenging, Finnegan's Wake, his two later and main books. But we also remember that Joyce had earlier writings, such as Stephen Hero, a sort of semi-autobiographical book, and a great book of short stories called Dubliners. And both of those written very much in what one might describe as conventional English, but giving very sensitive descriptions of life in Ireland, particularly in Dublin, in the early 1900s. But then his style became more challenging. He became more interested in writing, if you like, the inner mind rather than the observed world, and made a great use of interior monologue, which is a form of writing where you literally got inside the narrator's head rather than observing what he or she saw through their eyes. Now, Joyce didn't exactly invent the interior monologue approach. It had been developed by some earlier experimental writers before him, but he certainly seized it with both hands. And there are those who perhaps sort of see Joyce as one of the Irish revolutionaries, because during his lifetime, Ireland achieved its independence with an uprising which started in 1916 and eventually sort of ended up with the departure of the British from England. And you could say that Joyce saw himself almost as taking control of the English language and standing it on its head and using English, although it's the, if you like, the language of the ruler rather than of the ruled, he used English in such a novel and experimental manner that he almost he took over the English language as Ireland took over its own country. Well, again, although Joyce was in fact reviled during his own lifetime for his writings, which were not clearly understood by many people, including many Irish people. And perhaps we remember, and he therefore wasn't honoured in his own country until relatively recently. But there were other Irish writers at the time. Oscar Wilde is perhaps well known, again very experimental in his own way, and again for reasons other than his writing, running into problems with public opinion. But Oscar Wilde, a great Anglo-Irish writer rather than a purely Irish writer. George Bernard Shaw, a great playwright and a great left-wing sort of writer for justice, and of course W.B. Yeats. Again, a great writer in more conventional, though in his own way experimental, both in writing plays for the emerging Abbey Theatre, of which he was a critical founder member, and great poetry, and of course more latterly, more recently, Seamus Heaney. So that although Joyce himself was not a, inverted commas, international prize winner, the others were Nobel. So Ireland, for its size, it's remarkable that we have quite a number of Nobel Prize winners for literature. again, going back to Molly, as a museum, we are trying certainly to use all of the latest curatorial and communications means to make the library, which is after all a library of literature, and literature can be hard to present in terms of printed pages shown behind glass cases. So we're using a lot of new technology to make the introduction to Irish writing over the centuries, including our current century, including new and emergent Irish writers and illustrators, to engage the current generations who normally have their noses stuck in their sort of mobile phone devices, to get them out of that and back to at least reading, all right, on e-books or whatever, but ideally also, particularly in the field of illustration, at an early age, introducing them to old-fashioned, hard copy, turn the pages, and enjoy the experience. So yes, the Molly Museum is one of the many ways in which new Irish writing for both younger readers, and particularly that new, almost new format of literature, the young adult, which is a bit condescending term perhaps. But yes, this writing is continuing to flourish and be experimental in Dublin and in Ireland generally. I will continue to turn the pages for the rest of my life. And I'm afraid I have almost an anathema, a total dislike of trying to read on a device. However, yes, reading or absorbing the thoughts of somebody else through a medium will increasingly be visual in content, other than formalized letters written on a formalized page, which you then turn over. So, I mean, I probably am unaware of the ways in which people will, inverted commas, read in future generations. I keep asking my grandchildren, but I don't always understand their answers.